There is a moment in every person's life when the noise becomes unbearable. The opinions of others begin to shape your decisions. The constant need for approval slowly steals your freedom. You start living according to expectations instead of truth. And without realizing it, you lose the ability to hear your own inner voice. That is why so many people fear being alone. They mistake silence for emptiness, when in reality, silence is where clarity begins. Most people run away from solitude because it forces them to face themselves. There are no distractions, no applause, no comforting lies, only you and your thoughts. That can be uncomfortable. But discomfort is often the doorway to transformation. The strongest minds are not built in crowded rooms. They are forged in moments when no one is watching, when there is no audience to impress and no one to validate your choices. If you are walking a path that feels lonely, do not rush to believe that something is wrong. Every meaningful journey begins with separation from the crowd. Growth requires distance from habits that no longer serve you and from people who only know the version of you that refuses to change. Solitude is not a punishment. It is preparation. It is life creating the space you need to become someone stronger, wiser, and more grounded than you have ever been before. The world celebrates constant connection, endless conversations, and always being available. But true strength is discovered when you no longer depend on external voices to define your worth. When you become comfortable sitting with yourself, you develop a confidence that cannot be shaken by rejection, criticism, or temporary loneliness. You stop chasing acceptance because you finally accept yourself. So if today you feel alone, do not see it as a sign that you are falling behind. See it as an invitation to grow beyond the limitations that once held you back. Perhaps this season is not taking people away from you. Perhaps it is removing distractions so you can discover the person you were always meant to become. And once you understand the power hidden within solitude, you will never fear being alone again. The greatest misunderstanding about being alone is the belief that it means something is missing. Society has conditioned people to think that success is measured by how many friends surround them, how often their phone vibrates, or how many people recognize their name. From childhood, we are taught to seek acceptance before authenticity. We learn to fit into groups before we learn to understand ourselves. As a result, many people spend years building relationships with everyone, except the one person they can never escape, themselves. This is why solitude feels uncomfortable. It removes every distraction and places you face to face with your own mind. At first, this encounter can feel unfamiliar because most people have spent their entire lives avoiding it. When you are constantly surrounded by people, it becomes very easy to mistake borrowed opinions for your own beliefs. The crowd has a subtle influence. It tells you what success should look like, what happiness should feel like, and what dreams are considered worthy. Without realizing it, you begin making choices based on expectations rather than conviction. You choose careers that impress others instead of work that fulfills you. You stay in relationships that feel empty because you fear being alone. You remain silent about your true thoughts because disagreement feels dangerous. Every compromise distances you a little further from who you really are. Solitude interrupts this cycle. It removes the constant stream of external voices until only one voice remains, your own. At first, that voice may sound uncertain because it has been ignored for so long. It may question your direction, expose your fears, and reveal uncomfortable truths about the life you have created. Many people mistake this discomfort as proof that solitude is unhealthy. In reality, discomfort is often the first sign that healing has begun. A wound cannot be treated unless it is first uncovered. In the same way, your mind cannot grow stronger until it is willing to examine what it has been hiding. The strongest individuals throughout history did not become remarkable because they constantly sought company. They developed extraordinary character because they learned to spend meaningful time alone. They reflected before they acted. They questioned before they accepted. They strengthened their discipline when no one was watching. Solitude gave them the opportunity to build an identity that did not depend on applause. When the world finally noticed them, their confidence had already been established in silence. There is an important difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling that something essential has been taken away from you. Solitude is the realization that nothing essential was ever outside of you to begin with. One creates suffering because it focuses on absence. The other creates strength because it focuses on presence. The same empty room can either become a prison or a sanctuary, depending on the state of your mind. If you believe your happiness depends entirely on others, every moment alone will feel like rejection. If you understand that peace begins within, every quiet moment becomes an opportunity to deepen your awareness. Many people fear silence because silence cannot be manipulated. In conversation, you can hide behind humor, achievements, or carefully chosen words. Alone, none of those masks remain. Your habits become visible. Your insecurities become impossible to ignore. Your excuses lose their power because there is no audience left to convince. This is why solitude demands honesty. It asks questions that no one else can answer for you. Are you living according to your own values? Are your ambitions truly yours? Are your relationships built on love or dependency? These questions rarely appear during moments of distraction. They emerge when everything becomes quiet enough for the truth to be heard. This process of self-examination is not pleasant every day. Some mornings you will discover fear hiding beneath your confidence. Some evenings you will recognize patterns that have repeated for years without your awareness. You may realize that much of your anxiety comes not from your circumstances, but from your attachment to other people's approval. You may notice that your greatest limitations were never created by the world around you, but by beliefs you accepted without question. These realizations can feel heavy, yet they are also liberating, because what is seen clearly can finally be changed. As you continue spending time alone with intention rather than avoidance, something remarkable begins to happen. The opinions that once controlled your emotions slowly lose their influence. Criticism no longer destroys your peace because your worth is no longer determined by another person's judgment. Praise becomes enjoyable but unnecessary because your confidence no longer depends upon it. Rejection becomes information instead of devastation. You begin making decisions from a place of clarity instead of fear. The need to constantly explain yourself starts disappearing because you no longer require permission to live according to your values. Solitude also teaches patience, a quality that modern life desperately tries to erase. Everything around us encourages immediate gratification, instant messages, instant entertainment, instant validation. Yet the most valuable transformations have never happened instantly. Character develops slowly. Wisdom matures through observation. Emotional stability grows through repeated moments of choosing discipline over impulse. When you spend time alone, you gradually become comfortable with progress that cannot be measured overnight. You stop expecting dramatic breakthroughs every day and begin appreciating the quiet consistency that shapes lasting change. The mind itself becomes different. Instead of reacting automatically to every emotion, you learn to observe your thoughts before believing them. You recognize that fear often exaggerates danger. You notice how comparison steals contentment. You become aware of how anger rises, peaks, and eventually fades without needing to control your actions. This awareness creates freedom. A person who cannot observe their own mind becomes a servant to every passing emotion. A person who develops awareness becomes capable of responding instead of merely reacting. There will always be people who misunderstand your desire for solitude. Some will assume you are distant. Others will think you are lonely. A few may even feel uncomfortable because your independence reminds them of the dependence they have never questioned. You do not need to convince them otherwise. Every person walks their own path at their own pace. Those who have never experienced the value of silence often judge it from the outside. They see only the absence of people, never the presence of growth. Eventually, solitude stops feeling like isolation and starts feeling like home. You no longer search desperately for noise to fill every empty moment. A quiet morning becomes a gift instead of a burden. A walk without conversation becomes an opportunity to reflect instead of something to escape. Your relationship with yourself grows stronger than your fear of being misunderstood. Decisions become simpler because they are guided by principles rather than popularity. The foundation of your life becomes internal instead of external, allowing you to remain steady whether you stand in a crowd or completely alone. From the moment we enter the world, we are surrounded by invisible expectations. We are rewarded when we behave in ways that others approve of and discouraged when we choose a different path. As children, this teaches us how to live in society. But as adults, many never move beyond this stage. They continue seeking permission to be themselves. They measure their worth through compliments, recognition, and acceptance. They become experts at reading the room while forgetting how to read their own heart. The desire for validation quietly becomes the force that shapes almost every decision they make. The problem with living for approval is that approval has no finish line. There will always be someone who expects more, wants something different, or disagrees with your choices. If your peace depends on satisfying everyone around you, you will spend your entire life chasing something that can never be fully achieved. One person praises you while another criticizes you. One group welcomes you while another rejects you. If your identity changes with every opinion you hear, then you no longer belong to yourself. You become a reflection of whoever happens to be looking at you. Many people do not even realize how deeply this habit controls them. They choose clothes because they fear judgment. They remain silent during important conversations because they do not want conflict. They hide their dreams because they worry about being laughed at. They stay in careers that make them miserable because leaving would disappoint their family. They continue unhealthy relationships because loneliness feels more frightening than pretending to be happy. None of these choices come from wisdom. They come from dependence on external validation. This dependence slowly weakens the spirit. Every decision becomes exhausting because it requires constant calculation. What will people think? Will they approve? Will they understand? Instead of asking what is true, people ask what is popular. Instead of asking what aligns with their values, they ask what receives applause. Over time, this habit creates an invisible prison. The walls are built from other people's opinions, but the lock is created by your own fear. Real confidence begins the moment you stop negotiating your identity with the outside world. Confidence is not loud. It does not seek attention. It does not announce itself through arrogance or constant displays of strength. Genuine confidence is quiet because it does not need witnesses. It comes from knowing who you are, even when nobody agrees with you. It allows you to remain steady in criticism without becoming defensive and humble in praise, without becoming addicted to admiration. This kind of confidence cannot be purchased, inherited, or borrowed. It is built through repeated acts of honesty with yourself. Every time you make a decision based on your principles instead of public opinion, your inner foundation becomes stronger. Every time you speak the truth, despite discomfort, your self-respect grows. Every time you refuse to betray your values for temporary acceptance, you prove to yourself that your integrity is worth more than approval. One of the greatest traps of modern life is the illusion that visibility equals value. People constantly compare themselves to carefully edited images of success. They measure their lives against moments that others intentionally choose to display. They begin believing that popularity is proof of purpose and attention is proof of significance. Yet history repeatedly reminds us that many of the most meaningful contributions were created in silence, long before anyone noticed them. Recognition often arrives after years of unseen effort. The person focused only on applause rarely develops the patience necessary for true mastery. Building yourself requires accepting that progress is often invisible. The strongest habits develop quietly. Discipline is built in ordinary mornings when nobody is watching. Wisdom grows through private reflection rather than public performance. Emotional stability is strengthened during moments when you choose patience over impulse, even though no one will ever know the struggle you overcame. These victories rarely receive praise, yet they shape the person you become far more than public achievements. When you stop depending on validation, something unexpected begins to happen. Your relationships become healthier. You no longer expect others to constantly reassure you because your sense of worth is no longer fragile. You appreciate compliments without needing them to survive. You accept criticism without allowing it to define your identity. Instead of using relationships to fill emotional emptiness, you begin sharing your life from a place of completeness. Love becomes an exchange instead of a rescue mission. There is also great freedom in accepting that misunderstanding is inevitable. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, some people will interpret your actions through the lens of their own experiences. Some will project their fears onto your choices. Others will criticize what they secretly wish they had the courage to do themselves. Trying to control every opinion is impossible because every mind sees the world differently. Once you accept this reality, an enormous weight disappears from your shoulders. You stop living as if every decision requires unanimous approval. Building yourself also means becoming comfortable with temporary discomfort. Growth often requires disappointing people who benefited from your old habits. Some individuals become uncomfortable when you begin setting boundaries because they were accustomed to unlimited access to your time and energy. Others may accuse you of changing simply because you no longer tolerate behaviors that once exhausted you. This does not mean you have become selfish. It often means you have become healthier. Boundaries are one of the clearest expressions of self-respect. They communicate that your energy, attention, and peace have value. People who depend entirely on validation often struggle to establish boundaries because they fear rejection. They say yes when they mean no. They overextend themselves to avoid disappointing others. Eventually, resentment replaces kindness because generosity without limits becomes self-neglect. Building yourself requires recognizing that protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, but an act of responsibility. As your inner foundation strengthens, your decisions become simpler. Instead of asking whether everyone approves, you begin asking whether your actions align with your deepest values. Instead of changing your personality to fit every environment, you remain authentic regardless of where you stand. This consistency creates trust, both within yourself and among those around you. People may not always agree with you, but they will recognize that your actions come from conviction rather than convenience. There is remarkable peace in no longer needing to perform. You stop exaggerating your successes because your worth does not depend on impressing anyone. You stop pretending to know everything because your confidence is not threatened by learning. You stop comparing your journey to others because you understand that every life unfolds according to different circumstances and different lessons. The energy once wasted chasing approval becomes available for creating, learning, improving, and serving. The strongest people are rarely those who receive the most praise. They are those who continue doing what is right, even when applause disappears. They understand that character is revealed not by how people treat you when you succeed, but by how faithfully you remain committed to your principles when recognition is absent. Their motivation comes from purpose rather than popularity, from discipline rather than excitement, from self-respect rather than public acceptance. When you finally stop chasing validation, you discover that the freedom you were searching for was never hidden inside another person's approval. It was waiting for the moment you decided that your own integrity, your own growth, and your own peace would become more valuable than fitting into expectations that were never truly yours. One of the hardest seasons a person can experience is the season when life becomes quiet. The phone rings less often. Invitations become rare. Relationships begin to fade. The people you once believed would always be there slowly move in different directions. During these moments, it is easy to believe that you have been forgotten or left behind. The mind immediately searches for explanations. It wonders whether something is wrong, whether you have failed, or whether you are somehow less valuable than before. Yet what feels like abandonment is often the beginning of a deeper transformation that could never happen in the middle of constant distraction. Life has a way of creating space before introducing something meaningful. Nature follows this principle everywhere. Trees shed their leaves before new growth appears. The sky becomes darkest before sunrise. A field is cleared before fresh seeds are planted. In the same way, there are periods when your life seems emptier than it has ever been. Instead of assuming that emptiness is a punishment, consider the possibility that it is preparation. What you call loneliness may simply be the clearing away of everything that no longer belongs in the next chapter of your journey. Most people resist these seasons because they confuse temporary emotions with permanent reality. Feeling lonely today does not mean you will always be lonely. Feeling uncertain today does not mean your future lacks direction. Emotions change as quickly as weather. Some days the mind feels heavy, other days it feels light. If you build your identity around temporary feelings, your life will constantly move between confidence and despair. Wisdom begins when you recognize that emotions deserve attention, but not complete authority over your decisions. Purpose operates very differently from emotion. Purpose remains steady even when motivation disappears. It continues calling you forward when comfort invites you to stop. It asks you to become the person capable of fulfilling your potential, rather than the person who simply seeks the easiest path. This is why purpose often requires solitude. Without distance from constant noise, it becomes almost impossible to hear what truly matters. Every opinion competes for your attention. Every distraction pulls your focus away from what deserves your energy. Many people spend years filling every empty moment because silence makes them uncomfortable. They reach for their phones the instant they become bored. They surround themselves with endless entertainment because stillness feels unfamiliar. Yet the inability to sit quietly with yourself often reveals a deeper fear. It is not silence they are escaping. It is self-confrontation. They fear what they might discover if nothing distracted them from their own thoughts. They fear recognizing how much of their life has been shaped by habit instead of intention. Loneliness becomes unbearable only when you believe your value depends on constant companionship. The moment you understand that your worth exists independently of who chooses to stay or leave, everything begins to change. You stop interpreting every goodbye as proof of personal failure. People enter and leave each other's lives for countless reasons. Some relationships serve a purpose for a season, others continue for many years. Trying to force permanence where life intends change only creates unnecessary suffering. Every person who has built something meaningful has experienced periods where nobody understood the vision they carried. While others questioned their choices, they continued working quietly. While others sought immediate rewards, they remained committed to long-term growth. These seasons rarely look impressive from the outside. They often appear lonely, repetitive, and uncertain. Yet beneath the surface, Something extraordinary is taking shape. Discipline is replacing distraction. Patience is replacing urgency. Clarity is replacing confusion. The visible results simply have not arrived yet. There is a profound difference between being isolated by circumstance and choosing solitude with intention. Isolation often feels forced. Solitude becomes a decision to use your time wisely. You begin reading instead of endlessly scrolling. You reflect instead of reacting. You strengthen your body, your mind, and your character instead of waiting for someone else to rescue you from boredom. The same 24 hours that once felt empty gradually become filled with meaningful growth. Your relationship with time itself begins to change because you no longer see quiet moments as something to survive, but as opportunities to become stronger. Purpose also requires sacrifice, and sacrifice almost always feels lonely in the beginning. While others choose immediate comfort, you choose discipline. While others avoid difficult conversations, you choose honesty. While others follow familiar paths, you step into uncertainty because you know growth cannot happen inside complete safety. These decisions naturally create distance between you and those who are not ready for the same journey. This distance is not evidence that you are walking the wrong path. Often, it is confirmation that you are refusing to settle for a life that no longer reflects your deepest values. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that everyone is meant to accompany them through every stage of life. Relationships evolve because people evolve. Some friendships are built around shared circumstances rather than shared purpose. When circumstances change, those connections naturally weaken. This does not erase the value they once had. It simply means they belong to a different chapter. Accepting this truth allows gratitude to replace bitterness. Instead of clinging to what has ended, you become available for what is still unfolding. As your purpose becomes clearer, your standards begin to rise. You become more careful about where you invest your energy. You no longer seek company simply to avoid being alone. You begin choosing relationships based on shared values rather than shared convenience. Quality becomes more important than quantity. A few genuine connections become far more meaningful than countless shallow interactions. This shift may reduce the number of people around you, but it greatly increases the depth of those who remain. Purpose has a remarkable ability to transform pain into direction. Difficult experiences that once seemed meaningless begin revealing hidden lessons. Rejection teaches resilience, failure teaches humility, loss teaches gratitude, solitude teaches self-reliance. None of these lessons feel pleasant while they are happening, yet each one strengthens qualities that comfort alone could never develop. The person who embraces these lessons gradually becomes impossible to break because they stop expecting life to be free from hardship. There will be days when progress feels invisible. You will question whether your efforts matter. You will wonder if the quiet work you are doing is leading anywhere meaningful. During those moments, remember that the strongest roots always grow beneath the surface before the tallest trees become visible above the ground. Invisible growth is still growth. The absence of immediate results does not mean that nothing is happening. Many of life's greatest transformations occur silently, beyond the reach of recognition or applause. Eventually, you begin to understand that loneliness was never meant to become your permanent identity. It was a temporary season designed to teach you how to stand firmly without leaning on constant approval, how to trust your own judgment without endless reassurance, and how to build a life directed by purpose instead of fear. What once felt like emptiness gradually reveals itself as sacred space, where resilience, wisdom, patience, and inner strength were quietly taking root while the rest of the world remained too distracted to notice.